If you see Islam as restrictive, take a step back and reflect and reframe how you see Islam and your work. Really abiding by the guidelines that were set for us, it's only going to bring barakah in your work. And I've seen that firsthand.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to La Chicana Muslimah. My name is Alyssa. I am a Mexican-American convert to Islam, and my channel is all about lifestyle, deen, and art. I was recently invited to the Yassine Burlingame Center. They are a non-profit organization with a masjid and community center which is focused on providing community support and learning support to Muslim youth. Yassine had invited me to come and speak on my professional experience of what it's like being Muslim and a videographer and an artist. Of course, as a Muslim in this day and age, there's so much to balance. And I feel like there's a special transition that also takes place when you're a convert to Islam. If you were working someplace and you started wearing hijab, or you've had to tell them that you needed time to start praying, it can be a bit of an adjustment for the people that you work with, as well as the way that you balance your work and all the things that you need to do, as well as fulfilling your obligation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a lot of what I shared in this talk is just my personal experience of how I have prioritized Islam in the projects that I take on, the way that I go about my work ethically, how I go about my work modestly, and how my artistic vision has changed since becoming Muslim. If you're a young Muslim professional or you're just interested in the topic, I hope you enjoy. Bismillah.
I just want to start off by stating my intention for my talk today. I hope that whatever I share about my creative passions in storytelling and art resonate with you and your own passions and inspire you, and you can reflect on how you can use your talents as a means to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a little bit about me. I am from Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. I'm new to the Bay Area, so I just moved here in January. Alhamdulillah. I'm recently married. In fact, tomorrow is my 1-year anniversary with my husband, and we're expecting our first child in December, insha'Allah. I embraced Islam 2.5 years ago, and time really flies. I can't believe it's already been 2.5 years, but it's been a very beautiful journey, and I hope to share some of that with you in this talk today. I'm the only Muslim in my family. I'm a second-generation Mexican-American, so that means my parents were born in Mexico, and I was born here in the United States and raised here. My work as an artist and videographer really intersect my two identities, my culture as a Mexican-American and also my identity as a Muslim. Just a brief history about my career. So my career began in local television as a multimedia journalist, which is just a big fancy title for being a news reporter. I was in charge of finding my own stories, cultivating them, finding my own sources, and presenting my story on camera, writing my own stories, and everything was enterprise from start to finish. So it was a lot of work, but I definitely learned a lot in that process and learned a lot about storytelling. And then I transitioned into the foster care and adoptive agency child welfare realm. So that's where I took my storytelling skills. And then eventually I moved on to public education. And then as an artist, my medium is printmaking, and I've been a printmaker for about 7 years now. So in college, I studied broadcast communications. I went to the University of Texas at Arlington. My minor was in English, and ever since I was 9 years old, I wanted to be a news reporter. I knew that is what I wanted to be when I grew up, and alhamdulillah, eventually I did achieve that goal. I would say that my parents really built that love of storytelling within me because they would read to me a lot when I was a kid, and we loved watching movies together, so that's kind of how I fell in love with cinematography and the art of just putting together movies, and I would film and edit since I was 11 years old, but I'm glad I kept none of that work because it's pretty embarrassing looking back on it. I ended up working at the same news station that I interned at. As soon as I graduated from college, I was working right away as a local news reporter for a local television news station. And then I moved on, like I said, as a storyteller onto the nonprofit and public education sectors. As an artist, I just wanted to speak briefly about printmaking and the history of printmaking because it can be a little confusing for some people. It's not the most popular medium. It's been around for a very long time. It began in the Han Dynasty, China. So it's a very old medium, but in recent history, what has made it popular is how useful of a tool it was during the civil rights movement, and definitely connecting it. I love connecting it with my culture as well, because with the Chicano movement, if anybody's familiar with that, Chicanos are Mexican Americans and I'm Mexican American. So that having that connection of being a printmaker to me is just really special. There's just a short history that I wanted to share about that, and there's a really great article about Chicano history and printmaking, so I left the QR code up there for you guys. And I just wanted to share an example of a linocut print. This particular medium really helped with informing people about social injustice because it was such an easy way to print things using it this way. Before there were scanners, before there were printers, it's probably hard for us to imagine what that was like, but that's basically how people went about it and how they were able to share their art on a broader scale. So I just wanted to describe also the process of relief printmaking and show you a video. I'll just kind of describe it to you and walk you through it and how printmaking works. Okay, so here, this is how I get the design onto the linoleum block. So as a printmaker, you can carve rubber, linoleum, or wood. And I chose linoleum for this particular print. So this is like a soft material, and I carve it by hand using this V-gouge tool. And usually I try to take a few hours out of the day over the course of a few days, because it can be very hard work on your shoulders, on your hands. I use oil-based ink most of the time to print, so that's what I was showing here. And these are some of my tools. So there's a roller or a brayer, which is how the ink is rolled on to the linoleum block in order to transfer it onto the paper. So it'll show that here in a second. This is what the linoleum looks like up close. So it's very thin, and then rubber is just a little bit thicker. And if you think about, a stamp that you can get from Michael's or Hobby Lobby, that would be like an example of using rubber, in the printmaking form. Just an example of the ink that I was using, and I'm just mixing some of it. And the roller, so I was mixing a couple colors together in order to create this ombre look for a print that I worked on that shows a piñata, which if you're Mexican or Latino, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Everybody had a piñata at their birthday party. So the relief printmaking process is that you would smooth a piece of paper after the block has been inked up. It takes a while to smooth it out, but essentially you're making an impression of that ink onto the paper. And this process can take up to 15 minutes per print or more. And you have to slowly and delicately peel the paper off of the block in order to reveal the print. I get a lot of comments sometimes when I share my art in public, well, wouldn't it just be easier to use a printer? But this is the beauty of it, is that it's hand printed and each print comes out very unique, because not every single print is going to come out, as on a computer exactly the same way. They're going to have their own little bits that make each print unique with, how the ink transferred and the impression that it made. So this is particular print. I made a series of 8, I believe. So it's a very limited edition print. And it probably took me, I would say, 3 hours to just print 8 prints. So moving on to the next slide, I just wanted to share briefly that I was inspired by my cousin to become a printmaker. These are a couple of her prints, her original designs. She used linoleum for these 2 particular pieces. And we used to exchange handwritten letters, and I would see that her letters would be decorated with stamps. And so I asked her where she bought the stamps, and she told me I didn't buy them, I actually made them. And that's how the conversation started about printmaking. So I learned on YouTube how to do this. I never went to art school or anything. And so yeah, after 3 years of practice, I decided to turn it into a business. And I carved custom stamps for local businesses, over 100 stamps for small and local businesses. And it's just an eco-conscious way of for them to be able to brand their business. So this is an example of one of the businesses that commissioned me. There is a small cafe in Salam Institute in Dallas, and they have coffee cups which they stamp. So I created this stamp with their logo, and I just screenshotted an example of it. And I have a QR code up that has my website, so in case you want to learn more about that. And then I wanted to show you briefly how I go about carving stamps as well. So this is how I go about carving the rubber. I trace the design, and the design goes onto the rubber, and that's how I transfer it on there. Depending on the detail of the logo, it could take me more or less time to carve it, but it definitely takes a lot of attention to detail. So this is an example of the stamp that I carved for my own small business, Salaam Stamps. And then in the following video, I show how I go about upcycling, because it's really important for me to reuse materials and to recycle. I could buy the stamp blocks in bulk and mount the stamps that way, but I prefer to use older stamps that they no longer work, or the rubber doesn't function anymore, so I'll just upcycle older stamps for the new stamps. So it can be kind of a tedious process, but it's definitely worth it. And I think a lot of my customers really value the sustainability factor in it. And then in the last video, it's just an example of how the stamp is used. So I just inked it up and then showed a sample on a piece of paper of how it worked. But most of my customers, they will either stamp their coffee cups of their cafe, they'll stamp their bags, their paper bags, thank you notes, packaging, all kinds of things, sometimes even t-shirts. So there's a lot of function that they have for stamps for their business. And we're kind of jumping back and forth a lot with like videography and art. So I wanted to share a little bit about the challenges that I faced as a young professional when it came to videography. So I had mentioned that I embraced Islam 2.5 years ago. So at the time that I was a local news reporter, I was not Muslim, but there were a lot of struggles that I faced early on in my career. And I do want to mention that, sometimes we feel like we struggle to find purpose in our profession, but it may not be the profession that needs changing. It could just be that the avenue that you're pursuing, that passion, just needs to be a little different or adjusted. So in the news industry, it's a very cutthroat business. And a lot of people can kind of see it as something very glamorous, like, oh, wow, you're on TV, people know you. But being a public figure can be very, very difficult. When people get to know you, they have a certain expectation or standard that they have of you. And you really do need to maintain, a certain level of decor and professionalism whenever you are a public figure on TV. And especially if you are delivering the news, you have to develop that trust with your audience that you are a person that they can rely on to get their local news from. Underneath all of that, the business is actually very cutthroat because there isn't really a lot of mentorship, in my opinion, or from what I experienced. So there won't be a lot of people that would take you under their wing. And so that can be a struggle early on. The hours are very grueling. I would say personally that I experienced a lot of verbal abuse and harassment. And it's a very low-paying job as well. There's a heavy drinking culture in journalism altogether. Also, after embracing Islam, I think I realized that there was also a lot of objectification of women because our beauty is used to, in my opinion, boost ratings, and it can feel that way, But at the time, being a non-Muslim, I didn't really realize it or see it that way. But it wasn't until after I became Muslim and I embraced hijab and everything that I saw there's a true wisdom behind modesty and the guidelines that are set for us. There's not really time for a work-life balance, or even it's not a very conducive environment either for raising a family or being married because of the hours, the work hours, and the type of work. And then I would also mention that I experienced a lot of secondary trauma as a news reporter as well, because you witness a lot of just death and destruction. And I would say there was a total of maybe 20 parents whose I told the stories of their children who had passed away. So they either died from freak accidents or murder or disease or just unknown causes. And being young, at that time I was about 22, so I really didn't know how to handle those situations because I had never even been through death myself at that point, not even in my own family. So it was a lot to take on, as well as the trauma from the first responders that we would tell the stories of, or so on and so forth. So it definitely took some time to heal after that, but there were a lot of contributing factors as to why I left news reporting. But it was tough because I had been wanting to be a news reporter since I was 9 years old. So when I reached that goal, that life goal already at 23, I would think, like, what do I do with my life now? I already became the thing that I wanted to be. And I sort of had an identity crisis. I think there's such a wisdom, in that when you become Muslim, like, you shouldn't really tie your identity to what you do as a profession. First and foremost, you are a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And back then I didn't have that. So I definitely saw that later on, but it took a while to realize. So after I left news reporting, I moved back near my parents and I took a year off. And I realized just because I'm not a news reporter anymore doesn't mean that I'm not a storyteller. And I know that I can take my passions and use it for good someplace else. And that's what I went ahead and did, and I worked in the nonprofit and public education sectors, like I mentioned. We should reflect on, how unhealthy and contradictory to the fitra it can be to connect your life's purpose to your profession. So having a healthy separation of those things, I think, is important, because at any time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can make it so that we aren't able to pursue that profession anymore. So having that healthy detachment, I think, is important. And as a woman, I think it can be especially dangerous for us to have that mindset of attaching our profession to our self-worth and our identity, because it really holds us back from thriving, I think. And it doesn't mean that as women, we shouldn't have passions. We definitely should, and we should have ambitions, and we should want to excel in our fields of study, because there's many examples of Muslim women who have pioneered and achieved in fields of literature and art and poetry and medicine and so much more throughout history. But just to, remind ourselves to not lose sight that our main purpose in life is to be a servant of Allah. And these talents that Allah blessed us with shouldn't distract us either from our obligations to Him and the quality of our worship. So I definitely make a lot of dua, and I ask Allah to make the passions I have and the talents I have as a means of gaining His pleasure. So I did want to share a little bit about my documentary. Now that I have left news and I've moved on even from my work in public education and the nonprofit world, I found a real passion for doing volunteer videography for Muslim organizations. I've also took on the project of making my first documentary film. I really wanted to create a film that focused on the significance of Salah in Islam, and to show and have this film be a means of information for non-Muslims as well. So it's a big thing for me, because I want to be able to show this film to my own family and for them to understand it and to see, how beautiful Islam is in this part of our life with Salah, because in my opinion, I think Salah is one of the most humanizing things in Islam, because you are dedicating your time to remember Allah throughout the day. And even speaking about things in this film as far as like prostration and being in that vulnerable state and all of those things, I want to be able to share with all audiences. So it was also important to me that the subjects in the film which I chose, they share their narratives and their personal connection with Salah. So I wanted them to be of different backgrounds, and I have a born Muslim, and then I have a couple of converts who come from different backgrounds. And it was important to me that this film was set in Dallas, which is where I'm from, and that I took advantage of the local scholarship there as well. So I had a lot of help from the shaykh around the area who could oversee my work and make sure that I was staying in line with what I needed to. Briefly before we play, I wanted to introduce the clip. This is one of my documentary subjects, Sydney. She is also a convert to Islam. She embraced Islam a couple of years ago. She's from Texas as well. You'll recognize that she works with livestock. She's a ranch hand. She's a hijabi. And each person in my documentary has a very personal connection with Salah. So I won't give away what she said about hers, but this is just a brief clip from my documentary of introducing her and what she's about. Bismillah.
You're in jeans, boots, a button-up, and a headscarf? What are you? So that always kind of goes interestingly, because they just look at me like, I don't know what to make of you.
Welcome to my world. That's what I do. Work with cows, horses. Come on.
I think working within agriculture, being Muslim helps with that connectedness, in the sense that not only do I have a reason to do it of, it's the food chain, but also this is a creation of God. And as humans, we have both the right and the obligation to look after this creation. I'm going to do it in the best way that I know how. And for me, that's working with livestock.
I got this up in Utah this summer when I was working.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
That's good looking nice, man.
Came with the sheep.
Oh, yeah. Heck yeah.
I mean, I'm a woman in a male-dominated, physically demanding environment. My hijab is not my problem. It's just being able to do the work. Because if you can't do the work, you shouldn't be here. But if you can do the work, no one usually cares. Hijabi or not, I mean, I enjoy this environment.
Yeah, I work in agriculture, but even in things like dress, modesty, that kind of stuff, where I look at it and say, hey, look, I have the rights I need and the rights that I want through my religion. I'm not being crushed under the religion. Like, there's always a reason for everything, and I think, with that does come guidelines, but also empowerment, because everybody has a choice. I mean, there's a verse in the Quran that says, let there be no compulsion in religion, because the truth and the falsehood have been made readily apparent. And so when one looks for that, I think one's going to find that if you truly look for it as well. And it becomes empowering, because then you know where you stand and you understand why you do what you do and things like that.
So that was just a brief clip from my documentary, and I hope to be completing it soon with the editing. I finished the filming, alhamdulillah, recently, so it's still a project that I need to continue working on. But moving back to my art and how I've been able to intersect my culture and also my faith within my art. Here's an example of two of my prints. Before Islam, I would say my art was very different. I don't think that I really had a vision. And I think a lot of my work, and I can be very critical of it now, really lacked depth. To me, I just felt like it didn't have a lot of meaning because most of what I did was actually portraits. And when I became Muslim, since I embraced Islam 2.5 years ago, I took a break from creating art. I really wanted to take the time to learn the fundamentals of my deen and adjust to a new way of life. And I knew that that was going to have a significant impact on my art. So I took the time to consult with imams in my area and other people of knowledge and really tried to find a way to express myself through my art that would be pleasing to Allah. And that's kind of how I ended up finding my niche. I realized that there could be a lot of value in creating art that ties in my identity as a Mexican American convert to Islam, and then having things present in my work, such as things like the Kaaba. Like in this particular print on the left, the papel picado is very significant in our culture as Mexicans, and usually around Day of the Dead, like around this time, you'll see these papel picados decorating a lot of places. It could be anywhere, even like at a wedding. I had papel picado even at my own wedding. So it's a really significant kind of decor, celebratory decor in my culture. And I always wanted to create a print with, mashallah, I always wanted to create a print with papel picado, but I didn't know exactly like what to put in the middle of it, so I decided to place the Kaaba in the middle. And to me, this is like the perfect blend of both. And it's a real talking piece, especially when I take it out to pop-ups and I share this print. These prints are available on my website for purchase, but I usually take them out to pop-ups, and then people will have a chance to observe them up close and see the different colors I printed with. And then the second print to the right is one that I created recently, which I shared earlier, the process of how it was made. And this one, I don't feel like it's exactly obvious, how it ties into Islam. But for a lot of Mexican Americans, they'll realize that the middle, there's a piñata, and there's a certain song that your family will sing when it's your turn to go ahead and hit the piñata. And so I have the lyrics of the song in the front and the bottom. And so, inshallah, I'm creating a video for my vlog, my YouTube channel, where I talk about more in-depth the explanation of it. Specifically in my art, I feel like, I try to express that Islam beautifies culture. And I think that's really important, for converts, especially to remember that you don't have to give up your culture or your heritage just because you became Muslim. Because Islam has a way of beautifying those things in our traditions. So art is just the way of how I do that, how I reconnect with my cultural identity. But I just wanted to go back to videography for a minute. So at the time that I embraced Islam, I was working at a public school district, and I wouldn't say there was a ton of situations I found myself in that were conflicting with Islam. As far as the content that I filmed, because a lot of it was just kind of uplifting teachers and students. It was more so just the typical balance, as a young professional that you have to face with, like putting aside time for prayer, making sure you set your boundaries at work. Okay, are they going to give you that time that you need to pray? And then I, of course, had to set certain boundaries for myself, because like I did with Sydney in my documentary, I'm very conscious of the way of how I can preserve her modesty with the way that I film her if I'm going to show her on camera. And I think it's important that specifically with that in my documentary, that her presence is known. She is shown, and there's a lot of dawah in that, being able to see maybe other young women like herself who are, not didn't grow up being Muslim, who are from Texas, can look at that and see her and be like, oh, Islam is for everybody. I can do that too. And that's my intention for my YouTube channel, La Chicana Muslimah. But it comes with a lot of responsibility. But going back to videography and work, even for non-Muslim women, when I would film them, I would be very conscious of preserving their modesty as well. So that was really important to me. And that was just a standard, a personal standard. I didn't talk about it with anybody, but in my mind, when I was there at work and I was filming a teacher or a student or somebody, I would always keep that in mind. You know, even thinking about like the logistics of miking up, if I was putting a mic on, you know, someone, before I used to just put the mic on anybody, but then after I became Muslim, I realized, okay, I need to have certain boundaries. So I would have my male coworkers mic up the men, whoever I was interviewing, and then I would mic up the women. So just small things like that that I had to think about throughout the day at work, but it wasn't really anything big. And then as far as my freelance work went as a videographer, I had to think about, you know, is the business that I'm creating social media content for a halal business? There was one particular example that I can just share quickly, which I was filming a series of reels for a pet store. And when I was filming, I didn't realize in my shot that there was a dog toy, and it was actually like a beer bottle. And I didn't see it until I was in post and I was editing, and I'm like, but I really need this shot in there. You know, I can't really compromise the flow of the reel by taking this shot out. And so if you're an editor, then you know what I'm talking about. So what I did was I ended up blurring it out, and I was able to kind of just make it look slightly out of focus, and you could not tell that it was a beer bottle at all. And it wasn't anything distracting in the shot. But to me as a Muslim, I didn't feel comfortable having my name attached to that kind of work. So I just had to be conscious of that if I was filming something for a non-Muslim business, that I would think about those things. So post-Islam, I took on a lot of volunteer work and paid work for Islamic organizations, and it was a really, you know, beautiful time to get to know the community that I was in, especially as a new Muslim, you know, to share my talents with Islamic organizations and then build that community as a convert early on. So I wanted to talk about my YouTube channel as well, just briefly. So my vlog on YouTube is centered around deen, lifestyle, and art. And what really inspired me to create my channel was just watching other Muslims share their story about how they embraced Islam. So I watched a lot of convert stories, because back when I was contemplating embracing Islam, I didn't know that you could be Mexican and you could be Muslim. I didn't know that Islam is for everybody. So when I didn't really see a lot of Latinos sharing their stories, I still was kind of, you know, on the fence about it. But then I realized, obviously through my research, that anybody could be Muslim. And then I felt sort of like a call to create a channel with the skill set that I was given. But I definitely would say it took a lot of contemplation. I prayed a lot of istikhara. I made a lot of dua in general, just hoping that it was the right thing to do. Because I really do think that if somebody starts something like this, like a YouTube channel, and you're a Muslim, you really need to kind of reflect on your intentions and renew your intentions constantly, because it's really easy to kind of get lost in the sauce, like they say, and get caught up in having an online presence and people paying attention to you and looking your way. So it's really important for you to just think about your intentions and what kind of message you're pushing, because if you look at the Muslim influencer world, objectively, you know, there is a lot of just consumerism being pushed. I've noticed a lot of that, you know, buy from my Amazon cart. This is what I purchased. You should purchase this too. And I feel like young women, especially hijabis, are targeted. Like, you need this product in order to be like a good hijabi, and you need to buy this particular scarf, and this is what's trending right now. And as Muslims, I don't feel that we should be caught up in that kind of thing. So me personally, I try to really refine my feed and just seek inspiration from other Muslim influencers who pursue the things that I care about, like sustainability, minimalism, and things like that. For me personally, it's important that I share my experience as a Mexican American Muslim, but I do have to think about things like, am I oversharing? Am I sharing too much about my personal life? Am I representing myself in a modest way? And then being married, I would say, it adds another layer because I'm no longer just representing myself for myself. I have to be mindful of my husband and, what is his comfort level around what I share and what I post because, it's public. Those are just a few things that I would say if anybody's interested in starting a YouTube channel to just kind of keep these things in the back of your mind. People usually see Islam as restrictive, and I was asked if I see it that way in my creative work. And I would say I definitely don't see it as restrictive at all. I do have to think more about modesty, like I mentioned, but to me, I don't feel like that adds any restriction. If anything, it's protection. When I have to think about when I'm interviewing non-mahrams, for example, like for my documentary, do I have someone else present while I'm filming? Or if I'm filming by myself, am I filming in public? Those kinds of things. And then videography is it's very physical work. It's very physically demanding. So, I want to make sure that when I'm out filming, that I'm wearing loose, comfortable clothing, and so that I'm being modest while I'm doing my work, and then as well as preserving the modesty of whoever I'm capturing on camera. I don't see Islam as restrictive. I see it as protective, so that's also another reason why I went through just a lot of back and forth. If I film myself, what are my intentions? If I start this YouTube channel, what are my intentions? And ultimately, I came to the conclusion that I want to be an advocate for my minority community within the Muslim population, and I hope that my online presence can show Islam is for everybody, and it's for Latinos as well. I was also asked to share if I had any advice. I would say that if you see Islam as restrictive, to really take a step back and reflect and reframe how you see Islam and your work, because really abiding by the guidelines that were set for us, it's only going to bring barakah in your work. And I've seen that firsthand. When I wanted to start this documentary, I didn't expect to receive all the help that I did. I received so much help from the community, from Muslim, non-Muslim. There was just so many people who were willing to just do a small part, whether it was carrying my equipment for me or to huge things like lending me a professional studio with lighting and things that I didn't have or wouldn't have if it wasn't for their help. So I would say, as long as you try to go by what is pleasing to Allah, you will only see it come back to you in tenfold, the barakah. What kinds of friends or inner circles do you need? So I would say that if you surround yourself with people who support you, Muslim or non-Muslim, that's the best thing that you can do, because it's going to inspire you to do what's pleasing to Allah. If you're around other people who that's important to them as well. And then knowledge is key, and just really knowing, what the purpose is and the wisdom behind guidelines, that you're following, because the knowledge will bring you ease, insha'Allah. How can we be conscious of Allah in our work? So I would say that making dua constantly is very important and super key. Every time that I take on a new project, I will pray istikhara. And even with my documentary, I've been working on it for about 2 years, and I constantly make istikhara about it. So I'll literally say things in my dua like, oh Allah, if this project is good for me in terms of my deen, my dunya, my akhirah, then facilitate it for me with ease and bless me through it. And at the same time, I think it's important to maintain your sincerity in the next part of that prayer, which is asking Allah to take it away from you if it has bad consequences on your deen, dunya, akhirah. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to become attached to a project that is going to take you away from Allah. You don't want to become attached to anything that would take you away from Him. So it's really important that you seek refuge in Him and that you ask Allah to protect you from your own ego when pursuing, creative endeavors like this. That other people are going to be watching, making sure like that you're not doing these things to please other people, that you're trying to create a work that would be pleasing to Allah. So I'm constantly asking Allah to purify my intentions and to purify my heart. And then in the next slide, I just wanted to share a couple of inspirations that I have. So these two I feel like are very good representatives of how videography can be such an essential tool for learning about Islam and like sharing about Islam. And Yaqeen Institute, I've seen them grow over the last 3 years, in their videography and really investing in storytellers. And they create such beautiful work, mashallah. So everybody I know looks forward to the Ramadan series every year. And this last one that they did was the Why Me series, and they kind of made it like a mini fictional series where you followed along to the story of a Muslim that I feel like a lot of people would connect with. So it was a beautiful series, and I found a lot of inspiration in it. Towards Eternity is another channel. It's like a Dawah channel. So they have a lot of convert stories on there, but they also just share general knowledge, about what is the story of Adam alayhi salam in Islam versus what does it say in Christianity in the Bible. So they'll have videos like that. And then I didn't share an example on here, but I just wanted to mention briefly that there's other artists that I have found inspiration in. Peter Sanders is one that my husband actually introduced me to his work. And he's a Muslim photographer, and he's a convert as well. So he actually began his career in London, photographing really famous musicians like Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones. And then when he embraced Islam, his work completely changed. And then he began capturing the Muslim world. And I remember when we had visited the local bookstore, Islamic bookstore, we found one of his books that has all of his work, and he had photographed all of these well-known scholars around the world, and it was just so beautiful, and it brought me to tears when I looked at it, because I was just thinking this is exactly what I want to do. I want to use my passions and my talents to show people the beauty of Islam. And in the last slide, I just wanted to share my QR codes. So if you want to keep in touch and follow my Instagram at Salaam Stamps and my website as well. I also have my YouTube channel and then my videography portfolio as well. I just wanted to make sure I shared that with you guys. I just wanted to finish off with a dua, because if you've tuned into this, I really hope that it's helped you in some sort of way, at least to remind us to be conscious of Allah in the work that we do as creative professionals. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. O Allah, we ask you to send peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the prophets and messengers who came before him, his family and companions who served alongside him, and all of those who follow in his blessed path until the day of judgment. We ask you to make us amongst them. Ya Rabbi, we ask you to purify our hearts, guide us on the straight path, and elevate our iman. Ya Kareem, we ask you to place barakah in our projects and our creative endeavors. O Allah, use us and the talents and passions you blessed us with to show the beauty of Islam to others. Make our work a means of bringing us and those around us close to you. Make our work a means of obtaining your pleasure. O Allah, grant us tawfiq, ultimate success in this life and in the next. Allahumma innaka afuwun tuhibbu al-'afwa fa'fu anni. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Allahumma ameen.